Ladies and gentlemen,
Good evening.
Are you ready?
Okay, here we go.
You're listening to the Deal Room Podcast. Join us as we bring you the inside scoop on business sales and acquisitions. Get across trends in the area and hear the industry's best recount their real-life tips, traps, and experiences. Now, here's your host, Joanna Oakey.
Hi, it's Joanna Oakey here, and welcome back to the Deal Room Podcast, a podcast proudly brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. Now, today we're back with part 2 of our 2-part series with Ed Chan, the co-founder of Chan & Naylor Accountants and Wise Mentoring for Accountants. Now, if you missed part 1, I highly recommend that you go back and have a listen to that, because we talked about some really important areas relating to this concept of growing your business through mergers and acquisitions. So in part 1, we looked really briefly at the 3 ways that you can grow a business, where acquisition is just one of the 3. And we also started taking a deep dive into the 4 risk areas in using acquisitions as a vehicle for business growth. Now, today we're finishing off our review into those 4 key risk areas, and we're also taking a much deeper dive into looking at acquisitions versus organic growth and product monetization as strategies for growing a business or indeed an accounting practice. So Ed and I are talking specifically about his experience from growing his accounting practice, Chan & Naylor, and some of this information that he now passes on to his coaching clients and through Wise Mentoring, which is set up as a mentoring program for accountants who are growing their practice. But all of the things that we talk about in this episode and the previous episode are just as applicable to any organisation that's looking at acquisitions as a growth strategy. And indeed, it's also useful for people who are looking at selling their business into the future, because we've got some really good tips along the way about the vendors, so vendors or sellers of businesses, and the sorts of things that they really need to be putting in place to avoid issues occurring in the earn-out period or the retention period, whatever you're calling it, after the initial sale has completed. So buckle in. As I said, if you haven't listened to part 1, highly recommend going back and listening to that first. And here we go with part 2. I loved recording this. Hopefully you love listening to it even half as much as I loved recording it. So here we go with part 2 with Ed Chan. So location.
Yeah,
How do you deal with that? You either move or you don't you? What's the midway here?
Mate, there's a lot of, at the moment, there's a lot more buyers than there are sellers. And
for accounting practices. Not for many other businesses, but accounting practices.
Like financial planning businesses.
Yes, that's right.
But there are in accounting, and but they don't always go very smoothly because of the conditions or the terms. So often when someone sells, they want someone to move into their premises because their clients are used to coming to their premises. So if a buyer was to move into their premises, that's the ideal situation. Now, but most buyers won't move into your premises because they've already got their premises and they want to do what's called a tuck-in. I call it a tuck-in. Buyers tuck it into their practice.
Well, I'm glad you brought this up, because this is a bit of industry-specific jargon in the acquisitions environment. No one else talks about tuck-ins, just you accountants. So maybe can you give our listeners who perhaps don't know what a tuck-in is a bit of an overview of tuck-ins? I think it's a great phrase.
When a larger firm buys a smaller firm, they move them from their offices to the bigger firm's offices. So generally, if the buyer is the bigger firm, they'll move the smaller firm to their premises. So we tuck them into the bigger firm. But most buyers will want to move the vendor into their office, and sometimes the vendors don't like that, and they might own their own building and they want a tenant, or there's all sorts of reasons for that. So just getting all the conditions right, to find to match the seller to the perfect buyer, if you like. That's a bit hard, but certainly probably 20 buyers to one seller, and that might be conservative. It could be more like 50 buyers to or 100 buyers to one seller.
Wow.
But just trying to find the ideal buyer is the vendor's challenge.
So then are you saying that an ideal buyer is more likely to be someone who's happy to let the business sit in the current premises?
Yeah.
Well, I guess maybe perhaps just, once again for a period of time. Is that right?
Yes. Well, I just to share a personal experience. I was trying to buy this firm and I was tucking them into our office, and I spent a whole year negotiating with him, and he was agreeable to move over. And he'd owned his own premises, so I was able to convince him that he had to sell it or rent it out, and he agreed to that. And in the negotiations, which took like nine months to a year, he finally crossed all the T's and dotted the I's, and we had a contract, and I was just about to sign the contract, and then I didn't hear from him. So I kept bringing him back, and he was avoiding me. So I sensed there was something wrong. And then I finally got in touch with him, and he said, "Oh, I had someone, pay the same price, but they're moving into my premises, so I'm going to sell it to them." So
after all that time, that's why this space can be very frustrating. And the brokers listening, just nodding their heads, because of course they don't. It's very annoying, I guess, when you're there and you've invested all your time. But bear in mind, the brokers actually don't ever get paid until it goes through. So
that's right.
So I think that's a really good warning story. And maybe in that instance as well, perhaps it's also about the vendor not really being clear, or perhaps not even understanding themselves what some of the important things were for them in the sale. And maybe it's about that as well, really being able to get clear about what the actual important elements are for each of the parties, which may not always be the first things that are in your mind as what's important.
And there's a difference between a vendor who's selling to retire and a vendor who's selling to move on to another business. The vendors who sell to retire, often they go in the roller coaster. So, today they feel like doing it, tomorrow they change their mind, and then the next day they're back on. So they take you on this roller coaster, and it's you've got to be really patient with them, because look, I can understand it, because it's a huge change to their lives. They get transitioned into the next stage of their life, and you want to resist growing old as long as you can.
And it's been their business baby, I guess. This is the thing.
It's there.
I think it's an emotion thing.
Hugely emotional. It's a hugely. And their business was them. That's what defined them. That's what gave them purpose, and to finally make that decision to. It's a bit like nobody wants to go to a nursing home, so you want to resist that as long as you can. So you get that. So you've got to be really, really, really patient.
And I guess then quickly flipping, because I think even though we're talking about acquisitions, I think a lot of what we're talking about here is actually really useful information for the vendors as well. So if you're looking to sell your practice, I guess it's being yourself aware of some of this emotion that might come up, but also getting really clear on your own reasons for selling and what's important to you out of the whole sale process, and starting early, because obviously if a long transition is going to be the thing that potentially preserves the value of the client base moving forward, then that also will be useful for you in terms of getting your earn out. Okay, so both the risk of the vendor leaving and the moving office is both the I guess you're saying here, Ed, potentially the answer is a softly approach, let it sit for a while, and then over time look at making these changes.
If you want the vendor to move into your premises, to mitigate the risk, what we do is that we ask them to move over a year early. So they'll move their premises across to us, and then we either enter into a contract where he exercises the option in a year's time when he wants to sell, so that the clients are used to coming over to new premises. So we're actually, as we're speaking right now, we're doing one right now. So he's retiring, and he's going to move his practice to our office for a year, And at the end of the year, or any time before the year or whatever, he'll exercise the option to sell it.
Wow. So you do the move first.
Yeah.
So, okay, so it's not do the move later, leave it a while. It's do the move first. I love it. That's revolutionary, Ed.
Is it? Well, see, if you keep the vendor there, the biggest one is the vendor leaving. So the vendor's still there. So you've mitigated the risk of the office moving because the vendor is still there.
Yep.
So, it's just like him moving offices. So if they value him, they'll follow that person. Doesn't matter where the office is. So you eliminate that second risk by the vendor hanging around. And then at some point, he'll exercise the option then to sell. And then you've ticked the other box, which is, you've had a year of getting to know the clients and, getting introduced to them and getting into meetings with the vendor, showing your face. And often, the reason why the clients are skeptical is because they've never met you. They don't know you. And, so that's all it is. It's just to get to know the clients and.
And so then this next element, so number 3 that you talked about as the third risk area is staff leaving. So how do you approach that then?
Yes, that's a bit of a hard one, but you've got to look at each case on its own merits because obviously, if it's a sole practitioner and he's got an administration person, then it's not as risky because an admin person can't do the work. So it's not as risky. But if you had, if it's a larger firm and there was some, very senior accountants that's there, senior client manager who has the relationship with the clients, then if they didn't like the sale, then they could move on, and often they just move on. They don't take the clients, but they just move on. But sometimes I've come across situations where they've taken a whole bunch of clients, even a couple of $100,000 of them, and the one that the vendor was paid, but he'll lose his retention, and then generally the purchaser will have overpaid slightly because the retention hasn't quite covered the loss of the clients.
And of course, there is one legal way to deal with this. I mean, it's hard if it's not already in the contract, but, I guess this comes back to, if you're a vendor leading into sale, you should ensure that you've got the appropriate restraints in the employment contracts with your staff. And, I mean, you should do that anyway to make sure you're not leaking clients. But I guess on the buyer side, that's sort of about your due diligence process, as well. Like, here's a risk, isn't it, if you're having a look at the employment contracts and there is no non-solicitation of clients. I guess that sits out there.
I've been doing this for 30 years and I've been involved with, I don't know how many, I've lost track, but it'd be at least 20 or 30. And no one, not one single vendor had an employment contract that had a restraint.
Really? Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, there's a massive opportunity, isn't there, for us in the accounting? I'm taking a note right now, Ed. Okay.
Yes. So often when the vendor comes in and they want a new employment contract signed and the appropriate restraints in there, and that causes a bit of an issue.
Yeah, okay, I can see that. All right, so then if you've done this many transactions where you've not had the cover of having the restraint clauses and the non-solicitations for the staff that you're bringing on board, what do you put in place then? What are the practical means that you employ?
That's a really good question because it's on each case on its own merits, and often you talk to the vendor and the client manager is not a threat, and he or she's been there for 15 years, and he or she's not going to leave and take the clients, and it's not in their DNA, so to speak. So they know the person very, 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 very well. Now I've been involved with that many, but a lot of it was with helping other accounting firms buy fees. Now, as I said to you, I do a bit of coaching and mentoring, and then that's how Wise Mentoring came about. But in my travels of helping and coaching accounting firms, often part of our business plan is to grow. And we do the 3 ways of growing. We do the organic growth with the digital marketing and the website and all that. And then you do the product monetization. And then the last one is that you do the acquisition. So that's how I grow a practice. So that's how I got involved with so many. But yeah, so some situations are very, very sensitive. So if you're looking at a practice and there was a very senior staff member there that's, a bit entrepreneurial, there is a heightened risk. And I haven't personally been bitten by it, but I've know other firms that have done that, and they've lost, the staff's walked out with a couple of $100,000. I've seen that happen, but I touch wood, it hasn't happened to me yet. But I always try to get the employment contract signed, and that becomes very sensitive and very. But from a buyer's point of view, if that's going to cause a problem, I'd rather know about it up front.
Yeah.
So sort of read out the Riot Act if you like, but I put it there so if it's going to crack, it's better to crack then and not get yourself into trouble.
So you do that discussion generally before you exchange contracts, is that right?
It's all in the negotiations, yeah.
Because many vendors are really concerned about, their staff even knowing that they're selling, So how do you navigate your way through that?
Oh, in the agreement, it's subject, once we've agreed to everything, then if that's the last thing, then we would then say that it's subject to the staff, signing the employment agreement. And if they don't, then we have to sit down and, talk about it.
Yeah.
But sometimes, the situation, as I said, you can sense a situation where the staff's not a threat, so you don't even need to go down there.
Right.
But most of the time, they're happy to sign, a signed employment agreement because they're now working for somebody else.
Yep.
And from their own point of view, they want some security with the employment agreement. And, if often we might have in our employment agreement that if they should leave and take clients, then we ask for $2 per dollar in their employment agreement. And if they're never, if they're not a threat to you and they have no intention of going out working for themselves, then they just sign it. There's no problem.
Interesting. Yeah.
If they don't sign it, then you go, well, what's, are you paying?
Yes. Bit of a flag.
Yeah, I make it sound like it is, but it is a bit uncomfortable. I'll admit that. But, at the end of the day, you're borrowing money and you're buying this asset, and you don't want to be left with a debt and no asset. And that's it's just an accountant talking.
And in a minute, I just want to come back to this idea of, this 3-step organic growth, product monetization and acquisitions, and just sort of talk about, the benefit of acquisitions in that 3-step process. But before we get there, we do have one more risk that I just want to finish up on, and that's the changing the brand. Oh, and actually, I guess we talked about that already, didn't we? We talked about the 3-year stage to the letterheads.
Yes. It's funny, I've never had a problem on the brand side, and I don't know whether it's because Joanna and Ed is quite a prominent brand. I mean, like when we hire staff, we have a bit of an advantage because they want to work for Joanna and Ed because we're in the BRW's top 100 accounting firms, and some staff want to work for a firm in the top 100. So when it's Joanna and Ed, then I haven't had a problem with it. So, but I understand that other firms do. So the best way to do it is, as I said, the first year you have the vendor's name, right at the top, big letters, and you're down the bottom, it's like incorporating yourself down the bottom. The second year, you swap it around. And the third year, you just drop the vendor's name off. And by then, they would have got to know you, and it wouldn't matter what the brand was, because they would have known you by then.
Great. Okay. I love it. So then just before we wrap up, maybe if we just come back to where we started, you said that there's these 3 steps that you use in terms of, when you, I guess, dealing with your own practice, Chan and Naylor, and also when you're dealing with your coaching clients and through WISE, mentoring, talking about how to grow a practice. So that's number 1, organic growth, number 2, product monetization, and number 3, acquisition. So how effective do you think acquisitions are in comparison to the other two? And what do you see as the real benefit of acquisitions as being one of those prongs?
Sure. When you do advertising, it's a slippery slope. So you can spend, $10,000 and you may not get $10,000 back. You might only get $1 back. So it's a hit and miss thing. And I also found that 50% of the clients that come to you because you advertise are good clients, and the other 50% are not good clients. And the ones that are not good clients, they've left the accountant, the last accountant, not because the previous accountant was bad. It was just that they were really a high maintenance client, and they're always blaming the accountant. That's the problem. But 50% of them, it's not the accountant, but 50% of them it is the accountant that's the problem. The accountant's giving bad service, won't return their calls, all the normal things. But it's still a hit and miss. So you're getting a 50% success rate. And generally, if the client is the problem, you don't find out for a couple of years. So they give you a real hard time for 2 good years until you throw them out or they leave. And then they go searching for that other accountant that they think they won't accept they're a difficult client. They'll just keep blaming it on the accountant. So that's the trouble with advertising through digital marketing or normal marketing. When you go buy a firm, the clients there I call them rubber cup clients, as opposed to crystal glass clients. So a rubber cup client, you can make a mistake, you can drop the cup and it just bounces back up. So you can let them down a few times, and they're pretty resilient. And whereas a crystal glass, they'll crack. And often, what they're left with are rubber cup clients. All the crystal glass clients are gone. Not all of them, but, most of them are gone. So in the main, you get some really good rubber cup clients. So when you, and also if you pay $1 per dollar, you're getting $1 back. So it's a 100% hit rate as long as you can retain the clients. So for those reasons, there's advantages and disadvantages, of course. But in the main, when you do buy fees, they are good clients, and as long as you can retain them, and they're generally, what I call rubber cup clients.
And Ed, I just have to thank you here because you've given me a new analogy, a new word to use here. I've never thought of discussing the benefits of acquisition as a growth strategy just in those words before. I'm going to use it. I hope you don't mind moving forward now. The rubber cup clients versus the crystal glass. That's perfect. Absolutely love it. Okay, this is our tweet. Look, really wise words. And I guess just before we wrap up, can you think of what is the most successful acquisition that either you've done or you've seen one of your clients do? So yeah.
Well, the successful ones are where there's a genuine sale and a genuine purchase. What I mean by that is, when the vendor is not quite sure, and he or she takes you on a roller coaster.
Yeah.
Often you get you get scar tissue out of it.
Yeah.
And of course, not being too what's the word? Do it my way or else. You got to be quite flexible, and it's okay to be flexible because you only have to put up with a person for a year. For heaven's sake, if you want to make sure that you're preserving your asset, because you do have a liability against it, it is at a heightened level of risk.
Yeah,
you have to eat some humble pie to make sure that the clients looked after, so they transition, and you only have to put up with the other person's idiosyncrasies for 12 months or more, and just focus on the client.
Yeah.
And generally, it's very clear up front, and that's the advantage of a broker. The broker can hold both parties' hands through the process, because often, there's a saying, a fish can't see water, because both the vendor sees it from their own point of view and the buyer sees it from his or her own point of view. And a really good broker will talk, common sense to both parties and move the process forward. And often the vendor and the buyer can't do that. They're just too emotional or too close to it, and they do need that third party to say, "Hey, come on, Jack, you're being unreasonable here," or "Come on, Bill, you're asking too much," or that's really unreasonable. And normally that's not what happens.
Yes.
This one guy who wanted $5 per dollar, and he said that's normal. Yeah, right.
Yeah. And on that note, what sort of multiples are you looking at right at the moment for accounting?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We probably should have started with that. And we nearly missed it. Yes, like if you go to the bank to borrow money, they always do it on EBITs, so many times EBIT. And sometimes they don't put a partner's salary in there. So they just take the profit and they multiply that by an EBIT. And then other times they'll put a salary in there and they'll multiply it by 4 times. And so if you're doing a 25% EBIT and you multiply it by 4 times, that works. If you work it backwards back, it works back to $1 per dollar.
Right.
Now, but on the street, that's the banks. But on the street, anything under $1 million is sold on a dollar per dollar basis. So it can be anywhere between 60 cents on a dollar to $1.20 per dollar. And the 60 cents ones are generally, maybe there's a lot of I returns in there, or the clients are quite elderly. They might only have a year left before they retire or they sell their business. And the $1.20 are generally very, very profitable. And they might be doing like not a 25% EBIT, but they might be doing 40, 50, 60% EBIT. So if they're doing a 60% EBIT, then 4 times 6, you're getting a premium. But in the main, it's around between 80 cents to $1.20. It's normally around $1 per dollar. Now in the country, it's a little bit less, and in the cities a little bit more because the demand pushes it up. Now anything above $1 million, it's generally sold on an EBIT basis. So many times EBIT.
Fabulous. Okay, all right. Well, that's it. I think you've left us with some really good sayings, the rubber cup versus the crystal glass. I also like a fish can't see the water. I actually haven't heard that one either. But what a really great progression through this idea of acquisition as a growth strategy. Of course, we've been talking about accounting practices, but I think this applies just as well really to any business. But Ed, I think if you can just give us a quick minute talking about WISE mentoring, I just think that'd be a really useful thing for our audience to just hear a bit about, because you've got so much gold in what you've imparted to our listeners today. And to me, I'm raking it all in. This is fabulous information. I absolutely love every conversation we have, Ed. Every conversation just has so much value. So maybe if you can just quickly give us an overview of WISE, who it's for and what is involved in it.
Sure. I went through the normal trials and tribulations that accounting firms go through, and over the last 30 years I've developed systems and processes and all that. Now we've got 11 offices with 160 staff, and the whole place just works without me. So it just pays me a passive income now. It's like an investment.
Now, isn't that everyone's dream? I love it.
But it is achievable. I mean, most practices, the cycle, the business cycle is, you start off as a sole trader, then a lot of us find it hard to transition that to a business. But I've been able to transition it from a business to an investment, and then it just pays me a passive income. But in going through that process, I documented a whole lot of things, and then quite a few, not a few, accounting firms started asking me to help them. So I started helping them because I had plenty of time on my hands, and one particular firm called Jamie Johns from Sky Accountants. It took about 6 months to 9 months to turn him around, and then he now no longer works hands on. So he's more of a CEO role now, and his life completely changed. And he had his lifestyle was great, and he said to me, we should share this with the rest of accountants out there. And but he brought a particular strength. He was really, really, really good at documenting everything. So he produced a whole lot of, from just taking everything out of my head. I'm not so good at documenting everything, but it's all sitting in my head. So he was really good at taking it out of my head, putting it on spreadsheets, videoing, rubber cups and
crystal glasses and fish who can see water too, or can't see the water.
Can't see the water. And and all that, and so he's documented. There's about 150, tools, if you like, in the vault. It's called the Wise Vault, and it's an online course. You can go through it. It's a lot of leadership things and education, and it's around team structures and organisation charts, and how you work the flow of the traffic. And all that, and it's now a new business that lots of firms are joining up. So there's a free period there, and there's quite a few lots of free products if you go in. It's called Wise Mentoring, Wise with a Z, and mentoring.com, and go and download. There's a free book there, an ebook. So if you wanted to have a look at it, it's a trial. I think it's about a 14-day trial, so it's all free, and see if it's for you. And then we also run Wise Tribe, which you're involved with.
I am a very proud member of that. Yep.
Yes, you answer all the legal questions. So it's all practice management stuff, and I answer all the questions, and then we run Wise Live, a webinar once a month for the owners, and we also run Wise Team Clinic for the staff, because there's lots of training courses around for preparing accounts and tax returns, doing the work, but there's no real training for the leadership and management. So a lot of the staff you promote to manager, but there's no training, and they just wing it, and you can't wing it, because if you do it badly, you create so much damage to a lot of people. You create damage to the clients, you do damage to the staff. You also the profits disappear. So it's a lot of damage that's done. So it's not good to wing it. So there's a lot of training to help staff manage. And that's how you leverage. If you can manage, then you can leverage. If you can't manage, then you won't be able to scale. And it's not just about management; it's just putting the right infrastructure around you. Having the right, the right mind. I turned grinders, minders, and finders. You've got to be in the right seat in the right bus. And there's a team blueprint that you got to use. And it's a bit like you need an architect's plans before you get a builder involved, and this is an architect's blueprint on how to grow your business, your accountancy business.
That's absolutely fabulous, Ed, and I strongly recommend anyone who is a listener who has an accounting practice to go and check out Wise Mentoring, because I can tell you every time I speak to Ed, even if we start off with a quick 5-minute discussion, it ends up in hours because you just have so much useful information to impart, and you're so generous with your time, Ed, and I'm just so grateful. It's been a great discussion today, as it always is. And so we'll put a link in our show notes. So if you're running along the beach right at this moment, good on you. If you're in your commute to work or home again, just click in the show notes and that'll take you straight through to Ed and also Wise Mentoring. So go check that out. Ed, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on to the Deal Room. It's been an absolute pleasure.
No, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun, and we should do it again.
Let's do it again. Actually, we are. We're going to come back at some stage and we'll talk about growing your business through joint ventures, which is the one thing that we've left out of this discussion today about acquisition. So stay tuned, listeners. Wonderful. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you.
Well, that's it. That's the end of our two-part series with Ed Chan, the co-founder of Chan and Naylor Accountants and Wise Mentoring for Accountants. So, of course, in these last two episodes, we talked about a lot of topics relating to growing your business through mergers and acquisitions. We talked about the strategy, we talked about the journey, we talked about the roadblocks and some suggested tips. Of course, we got some fabulous one-liners from Ed as well about the rubber cup versus the crystal glass. So I'm sure I'll remember that one. But we also included some really useful pointers there, not just for the acquirers, but also for the sellers in this space, about how you can make sure you extract the maximum value from this interaction through the sale and acquisition process, and also doing the right things by your clients and keeping clients front of mind. Well, look, I really enjoyed this discussion. I thought it contained a lot of useful information. I hope you, the listener, did too. And if you would like to contact Ed or find out more about Wise Mentoring for Accountants, then just check out our show notes where we will link straight through to Ed, and we'll also link straight through to Wise Mentoring. And also head over to our website at thedealroompodcast.com, where you'll also be able to find details of how to contact our legal eagles at Aspect Legal if you or your clients would like to discuss any legal aspects of sales or acquisitions. We work with clients both big and small and have different types of services depending on size and complexity. So don't hesitate to book a free appointment with us if you'd like to find out how we might be able to assist. Well, that's it. If you have enjoyed what you've been listening to today, I do hope that you have hit that subscribe button so that we can be delivered straight to your phone or other favourite podcast player as we release weekly. And of course, if you would like to leave us a review, we'd be ever so grateful. Well, that's it. Thanks again for listening in. You've been listening to Joanna and the Deal Room Podcast, a podcast proudly brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. See you next time. Have you heard of Aspect Legal's partner program? Our partner program is a free program that's open to brokers, corporate advisors, accountants, and any other advisors to businesses who are dealing with organisations that are leading into a sale or acquisition of businesses or shares. As part of our partner program, we offer free access to our legal hotline, which is a support line to our specialist lawyers. We also provide a pre-free sale legal review to buyers and sellers, where we educate them about the process and timelines from a legal perspective. And the third element that forms part of this partner program is a match-up database that we run, where effectively we're able to connect up accountants or brokers or corporate advisors with businesses who are looking to either sell or acquire. So if you're a partner of ours, you go straight into that partner database, and where we can see opportunities to provide matchups, then we introduce you. And the final element of our partner program is ongoing education in the form of seminars, webinars, and meetups. And that's something new that we're introducing into the partner program in early 2020. So if you're not a partner, then all you need to do to become a partner is just pop us an email at partners@aspectlegal.com.au and just simply say in your subject column, I want to become a partner. It's as easy as that to get immediate access to our free legal hotline and all of those other resources. We look forward to having you on board as a partner.
Ladies and gentlemen.
That will conclude this evening's entertainment.
Thanks for listening to the Deal Room Podcast. To find out more about this episode and other episodes in the series, check out the show notes or head over to our website at thedealroompodcast.com.au.